go ahead and get started. Then hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Laura. I'm a member of the CSJ Professional Development Committee. I'm joined by Rebecca and Tina, who are our co-chairs for the PD committee, as well as Franny, our communications officer. Our team is going to be sending through questions or thoughts throughout the chat, and we encourage you to send your perspectives or anything that comes to mind throughout the presentation through as well. Please, however, save your questions for the end of the presentation. For the end, for anybody interested in CE credit, a link for a survey will be sent through the chat in the last 3 minutes of the presentation as well. So keep an eye open for that. Before we introduce our speaker, a few notes. First, a note that our committee is offering a doctoral internship for spring 2021. Applications for this cohort are due tomorrow, and you can find more information on our website, which we'll send a link for later. So if you have anybody in mind, if you're interested, please take a look. Second, although this is the last webinar for our fall series, we do have another series starting in spring 2021, which will be focused on racial justice. So keep an eye on our website and social media for dates and times on these events. With that, I want to take a moment to introduce tonight's speaker, which is Dominique Marsalek. Dominique is the Federal and State Government Affairs Specialist with ACA, where she engages in macro-level advocacy, congressional outreach, and legislative action on behalf of our counseling field. We are so grateful for Dominique's time, expertise, passion, and insight, and for your time in presenting with us tonight. So with that, let's see. I'm going to hand the floor over to you, Dominique. So Dominique, thank you again for presenting. Whenever you are ready, we're all set.
Oh, great. Yep, next slide. I'm ready. Perfect. So hi, folks. So I am Dominique Marsalek, the Government Affairs Specialist for the American Counseling Association. We're advised primarily on our state agenda. I'm also a gubernatorial appointee to the Board of Trustees for the Family and Children's Trust Fund of Virginia. Previously, I served as federal and state policy deputy for Prevent Child Abuse America, where I focus on child welfare law, including the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, the Families First Prevention Services Act, and the Maternal Infant Child Home Visiting Program. Prior to these positions, I served as Legislative and Community Affairs Advisor for the government of the District of Columbia's Commission on the Arts and Humanities, and as Chief of Staff for the Honorable Senator Ronald Young, where I helped to write, testify on, and advocate on several public health bills that became law, including but not limited to expanding the statute of limitations for child sex abuse survivors, the Ethan Saylor Alliance for Self-Advocates as Educators program, healthy foods in schools, red flag laws for gun owners, and a student loan repayment program for foster youth in Maryland. So I'm going to start with a quick quote from the World Health Organization. Advocacy is an important means of raising awareness on mental health issues and ensuring that mental health is on the national agenda of governments. Advocacy can lead to improvements in policy, legislation, and service development. So this might look familiar. The Counselor Advocate Scholar Framework for Multicultural Social Justice Practice really illustrates the symbiotic relationship between advocacy, counseling, and scholarship. So in some situations, counselors are called to be advocates in their community to alter systemic barriers, and advocacy, like counseling, is rooted in evidence-based scholarship and informed by evolving best practices within the profession. So to break it down a little bit, I have a couple charts here. Beyond grassroots, so we won't be talking about kind of the details of how to mobilize your community at the grassroots level. We're going to be talking about methods of engaging the legislative process, impacting policymaking and rulemaking, how to remain a part of policy rulemaking and guidance and implementation in your state throughout the calendar year. So you'll see there are many stages to long-term advocacy that begins with the most basic grassroots, which is government relations, state lobbying, federal lobbying, policy analysis, situation analysis, plan development and implementation, to building out your PR. So that's media relations, strategic communication and analysis, crisis communication, and message development, to strategy development. So looking long term, not just at one campaign or one issue that becomes urgent, but how do you have a culture of advocacy? How do you create that sort of long-term organizational strategy that looks at advocacy as a part of what you do in your day-to-day practice? And capacity building, which is more of that sort of long-term advocacy with facilitation training, year-long kind of engagement with spokesperson training, organizational development, communication training, one-on-one coaching, and whatnot. So looking closer at the advocacy pyramid, we're going to look at what policy change is built on. Of course, we want to maintain a level of grassroots advocacy and civic awareness, but policy change fundamentally comes from utilizing that sort of grassroots momentum for movement building. So coalitions across professions and communities with common goals that monitor both grassroots and community-based needs, while also monitoring proposed government policies for relevant campaigns to support, oppose, or amend. It also looks at allied professionals and networks, from contacts within government, from sustained communication, and responsiveness to critical urgent events such as COVID-19, as well as sustained public engagement. What does that look like? It can be communication via social media, letters to the editor, educational webinars, podcasts, journal articles, attendance at community events, and involvement in grassroots organizing and civic awareness. Education and informing the public and your officials is really just the crux of all policy change. So policy change fundamentally translates issues, barriers, and needs into solutions by navigating the proper channels within government and leveraging an already mobilized network. So this is a definition I just created from 10 years in the field. I didn't really Google it, but policy, in my experience, is an interactive process and relationship between local, state, suprastate, sub-federal, and federal authorities, using agreements, legislation, obligations, regulations, rules, guidance, and compacts, yes, of course. So this is really a relationship that informs each other and can be complicated. You probably will never know all of the ins and outs, but learning some basic processes in your state will help you determine where you want to act, local, state, federal, and to whom you might want to target a campaign. Local rulemaking and oversight of professions comes from implementation of state and federal mandates through administrative guidance between levels of government. So what does that mean? On the left, we have levels of government. So we have the municipal level, which is county, township, city, and then we have state and federal. And on the right, you'll see different kind of levels of legislation. You have statutes from Congress, which provides agencies and states with authority on certain issues. You have regulation, which is kind of more state level, more implementation, statutes that really explain how to act on mandates from Congress, and they're legally enforceable. And then At a lesser level, but still important, you have guidance to states from Congress or guidance from the governor or state legislature to state agencies about how to implement certain programming and activities that are not really enforceable by law. So with that very fast introduction to kind of policy, I bet you're ready to advocate. But one question we run into a lot is, how do you advocate during COVID-19? It seems pretty impossible. Well, luckily, we are able to engage legislators still. So we engage in teletown halls with local, state, and federal legislators in their respective districts. So you can do this either by setting up your own kind of Q&A town and hall for your organization or your group of interested constituents, or you can attend a teletown hall that your representative is putting on. So you can find out more about this by either calling your representative or visiting their website. For Congress, of course, you'll want to go to congress.org/members. For state, you'll want to visit your state legislature website and look for a calendar of events. And really helpful for this is you'll want to sign up for legislative and committee newsletter updates that will kind of keep you in the know of what's going on. And if town halls are too kind of big or difficult to maybe create, you could also engage in one-on-one virtual meetings with staffers in your state or congressional representative's office. And they're always happy to talk, and you can talk via the phone or a virtual platform. If you want to know who your state and federal representative is, you can go to the ACA Government Affairs and Public Policy website, counseling.org/government affairs. Ooh, hold on 1 second. Action Center. And on the right, I have a list of just some ideas of what you can do also in addition to meetings, you know, social media campaigns, letter writing campaigns, online fundraisers, taking some time now for really long-term strategy development, public awareness campaigns, developing your advocacy material. If in the past maybe you didn't have as much time to create material for public awareness and informing officials, even just explaining to them what is a counselor, and the very basics of mental health can sometimes be helpful, because a lot of these folks don't have time to learn every single thing about the mental health profession, and may not even have a background in mental health. So gathering intel on key elected officials and important committees, engaging your governor in proclamation requests to raise awareness on issues, so saying like Counseling Awareness Month, or whatever other issues that might be important to your state. Attending and testifying. So a lot of state boards and representatives are still engaging in hearings, and they are often allowing for virtual testimony, which is really helpful, or even just written testimony, which is also helpful, and developing action plans for your policy agenda going forward. So what do meetings look like? Very quickly. Meetings with, whoop, did I do that? Okay, looking at meetings very quickly and the breakdown of meetings. So when you're meeting with your state licensure board, your commissioners, your municipal representatives, your county council members, your state legislators, your governor's office, or your Congress member, you want to determine what your issue is. What is the issue in your community that people like? What is stopping practice? What is the barriers to practice? What is concerning in your community? Once you determine that you have an issue, you want to schedule a meeting with your legislators and determine the platform to host that meeting. So is it going to be Zoom, Ring Central? Is it going to be via phone? Creating an action alert for the folks you want to take action. So not just having the meeting, but also maybe setting emails in addition to the meeting, recruiting advocates to attend with you, and creating a participant guide that kind of explains to folks, oh, okay, so here's the issue. Here's how it's affecting our community. And here are some things you might want to say, and like who's going to say it, and doing a dry run ahead of time with those materials. When you go to the meetings, you'll want to always bring a one-pager because they have a lot of meetings. And sometimes they just can't remember everything. They might think, oh, I know this issue is important, but I can't remember why. The one-pager is helpful because they will put it in a file with a bunch of other data that they have, and they will use it. They really will. And you'll always want to have an ask. So sometimes in the moment we'll just kind of talk and forget that like the most important thing is to have an ask, not just say an issue is important, but say, will you agree to advocate for XYZ in the coming session? Or will you vote for this bill? Or will you oppose this bill? Or something that's an action for them. And then you'll want to create follow-ups that just say, thank you for meeting with us. Just a reminder, you agreed to this, and just kind of continuing that communication. Again, the link on the bottom, if you're looking for your state or federal representative, is counseling.org, Government Affairs Action Center. Okay, so we're looking at federal legislation. I do work with our federal team, but I am not the federal lead, so I'm just going to have some basic info here. I can answer basic questions. I can't get into details about the federal part. Okay, so one of the biggest ones, the Mental Health Access Improvement Act of 2019, S286, HR 945. This was getting a ton of momentum going into this year before COVID. And COVID kind of flipped everything on its head. So for a while it was stalled, and then it became very clear that it was an even bigger priority. But how it's going to get through, especially with an election year with all that's going on at the federal level, that's still a question. So this bipartisan bill provides for coverage of marriage and family therapists, as well as licensed professional counselors, mental health counselor services under Medicare. Specifically, Medicare Part B, which applies to mental health practice. You may not know this, but Medicare did not include counselors in the original language. So we are still working to include counselors. The bill was introduced in the House by Representative Mike Thompson, who's a Democrat, and introduced in the Senate by Senator John Barrasso, who's a Republican. So it's a very bipartisan bill. There are currently 113 co-sponsors in the House and 30 in the U.S. Senate. So what are some things you might want to know if you're talking to an elected or an interested member about Medicare when it comes to counseling? The Medicare population includes people who are older than 65 years of age, many of who are veterans, and the long-term chronically disabled. So this can really be any age that's considered chronically disabled. And what we find just from personal experience and talking to folks who have barriers to service, who are diagnosed with long-term disabilities, is that oftentimes those disabilities are not necessarily from birth. So folks acquire, unfortunately, long-term disabilities throughout their lives, and because Medicare does not allow for a provision for counselors, folks end up having to change who their counselor is if they end up receiving funding through Medicare. So again, due to outdated Medicare restrictions, LPCs are unable to treat clients that fall into the Medicare population. Currently, Medicare only allows for psychiatrists, psychologists, and clinical social workers and psychiatric nurses to provide mental health services. Licensed professional mental health counselors, of course, account for about 1/3 of the healthcare workforce in this country, and they have equal training and education. It really is just a matter of updating old legislation to include a population that at the time wasn't big enough part of the mental health community to be included in this landmark legislation. That's not entirely uncommon. Landmark legislation takes a really long time to change. If it's the first of its kind, it can take a long time to change. 1989 was the last time these provider options were updated by the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So what are we doing? We've done a whole lot. Going into COVID, we were meeting even with Nancy Pelosi. There was interest. It was very tangible, and there still is. But it is a bill that has a big fiscal note. So it does take the right time and the right framework to pass. So we're launching a targeted HR 945 campaign in order to urge the United States House of Representatives and leadership to include it in a future House vote or in a potential end of the year package. If you want to find out more, you can go to our Take Action page. So our Take Action page is located at counseling.org, Government Affairs Action Center. Some other federal updates. Okay. In the coming weeks, ACA, in collaboration with our National Telebehavioral Health Coalition, will meet with members of the House Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee to encourage the elimination of audio restrictions in telebehavioral health policy and an extension of current telebehavioral health provisions for a full year past the termination of a declared public health emergency. One thing that we have found throughout COVID-19 is that that looming threat of a declared state of emergency ending is really stressful for counselors. It's really important that during this time, folks still have access to counseling. So additionally, the National Telebehavioral Health Coalition is in the process of creating a first 100 days strategy proposal, which may include meeting with the Biden-Harris transition team. On November 24th, Congressman Jim Lavin and Glenn Thompson, co-chairs of the Congressional Career and Technical Education Caucus, introduced a resolution recognizing National Career Development Month, which is observed every November. This highlights the work that career counselors have done for decades. So state legislation. So like I said, I handle the portfolio for all 50 states and 5 territories. Here are a couple issues we're looking at. Counseling and COVID-19. So we understand that it has been a long and difficult process as all of us shift gears in our professional and personal lives in order to address the COVID-19 crisis impacting the entire country. We remain dedicated to our members throughout this crisis and beyond. Our primary concern remains with ensuring the well-being of our members and advancing their professional interests state by state. To better aid states in their continued efforts, we have put together a resource package comprised of guidance, templates, updates, and necessary information. So here embedded in these links, and also if you go to counseling.org, Government Affairs State Issues, you'll find these documents. You'll find guidance on telebehavioral health for states. The information provided here assists the counseling community in communicating with state leaders charged with navigating policy and procedure during a crisis or emergency. You'll find a template letter to state governors that requests telebehavioral health language and executive orders during COVID-19. This can be used for requesting an extension as well. And our COVID-19 state resources package is a compilation of state actions that have been taken regarding telebehavioral health. And you'll be able to find there some information on health regulations, insurance commission data, Medicaid guidance, and additional updates. So implications for state policy in the coming session. The reality of COVID-19 is that it is dangerous, and a lot of states are having to reorient their legislative and policy priorities, as well as how they have session to meet the needs of the crisis. While we remain committed to the long-term needs of the profession, it is advisable at this moment to pivot from any planned 2021 legislative agenda to meet the current moment, meaning that legislative priorities going forward should in some way be tied to COVID-19, unless they don't require a heavy, arduous lift. So something maybe like a resolution or a proclamation that's not going to be difficult, but all bills should in some way impact or lighten the load of COVID-19. Anything that's too arduous should be shifted to 2022. Legislative priorities include implementation of federal emergency mandates and state emergency mandates, new board protocol, and local responses to the crisis. Of course, we're here to support you throughout. So what are some of the things that have popped up during COVID-19? Of course, racism has been a systemic issue for a very long time. But during COVID-19, this issue has become very heightened. It is evident that during this crisis, there is great disparity in healthcare and access to healthcare. So ACA's Government Affairs and Public Policy team has been working with branches and states to encourage national, state, and local racial justice work considering the public health disparities revealed during the COVID-19 crisis. So we're encouraging states to incorporate racial justice initiatives into formal state policy agendas for the coming year. I am also updating our ACA state policy agenda on our end for 2021 to include racial justice. So we're asking states to craft multi-year action plans to address racial injustice in their state through short-term and long-term goals. We're doing so by providing suggested ideas, guidance for systems building, policy making, advocacy, and legislation. These have been communicated to states initially through a comprehensive package of data and guidance that include examples of key pending legislation in some state legislatures and critical state level policy health policy initiatives. This guidance was provided to branches online via ACA Connect. I'm also incorporating it into my meeting with branches, into my meetings. Okay, so while we are encouraging a wide spectrum of activity on the state level, reflective of the region and communities served, so offering that flexibility, we are still advising states on a few key items that are important for our overall campaign. So we're asking states to work with local and state governments in declaring racism a public health crisis. That's step one. We're asking states to encourage their mayors to join the My Brother's Keepers Alliance in a mayoral pledge of action. And three, we're asking states to utilize data and guidance provided by our team to craft tangible action plans for racial justice within the public health space and their respective communities, beginning with these two policy items and incorporating items of importance to their communities and region from a suggested list of actions. Okay, so here's some talking points. I know it's a lot, but I'm going to go through it. So we know that there's an increased risk for adverse life outcomes that put Black Americans at greater risk for PTSD, depression, anxiety, and other mental health challenges. Socioeconomic disparities and racial discrimination have been implicated in levels of higher psychological distress across the demographic spectrum, with concentrated adverse impact on Black Americans. Studies show that Black Americans are less likely to have access to mental health supports necessary for resilience and healthy life outcomes. The result is a public health crisis where suicide has now become the second leading cause of death among Black American children aged 10 to 19. The data shows that suicide among Black Americans is increasing at a faster pace than any other demographic. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reports that the rate of suicide attempts for Black adolescents has risen 73% from 1991 to 2017. Counselors are uniquely equipped to understand the implications of social determinants on mental health and to address the inequities through community building, public education, and promoting increased mental health awareness focused on cultural and social realities of Black Americans. As exemplified in the 2014 ACA Code of Ethics, counselors have a professional responsibility and ethical obligation to promote social justice. So here's the good news. The movement to declare racism a public health crisis is occurring at both the local and state levels of government across the United States. Local efforts have been increasingly successful, but state efforts normally do take more time and strategy, particularly if states require legislation for such declarations. We've seen successful local level declarations over the past couple of months, including California, Colorado, Connecticut, Georgia, Illinois, Indiana, Massachusetts, Maryland, Michigan, Minnesota, Montana, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Texas, Vermont, Washington, and Wisconsin. On August 5th, historic precedent was made when both the governors of Michigan and of Nevada officially declared racism a public health crisis. These declarations included an action plan for addressing the public health crisis. Public health crises, or PHCs, are foundational policy initiatives. What they do is they provide a means for directing state agencies and the legislature to allocate funds and efforts towards addressing a widespread health concern. If you think back to that list of kind of how does policy happen through the channels, PHCs sort of open the door to funding and certain actions that you can't take without that foundation. So this is an important stepping stone and critical precedent for a long-term mission. Okay, so moving again to removing barriers to service, the Interstate Compact for Licensure in the era of COVID-19. The Interstate Compact, Counseling Compact, which the American Counseling Association has partnered with the Council of State Governments and the National Council for Interstate Compacts and leading professional organizations within the counseling field on, is nearing completion after about 2 years of work. The drafting of the Counseling Compact has been an independent process facilitated by the Council of State Governments through participatory methodology that's inclusive of a diverse coalition, including ACA. ACA did fund the initial stages of the compact, but going forward, we haven't been obligated to any additional funding. The independent stakeholder review sessions began in the early fall and included presentations for state boards, counselors, legislators, and ACA branches. Over 34 sessions were conducted. Following review sessions with the public, CSJ facilitated workshops with the bill drafting team, finalizing an updated language for review by the advisory committee. The advisory committee has met several times since then throughout November, and the last full review occurs December 4th, knock on wood. Okay, so provided that the December 4th meeting goes well, we're hopeful to have an approved final public-facing draft from members by the end of the calendar year. Though COVID-19 will dramatically impact the 2021 legislative sessions, we are still aiming to introduce the final language to state legislatures in key states by mid-February. ACA's government affairs team has collaborated with CSJ on ensuring advocacy material is available online. This should be available by the end of the calendar year at counselingcompact.org. So that domain is set, counselingcompact.org. ACA is currently working on a list of key states to focus on for compact advocacy throughout 2021. That's comprised largely of those states with a long history of successful compacts. The compact trigger or thresholds within the actual language of the bill requires a 10-state minimum for enactment. Given that legislatures will be struggling under the weight of COVID-19, we may be looking at a longer process for that enactment for 10 states that rolls over into the 2022 session. But the compact remains a top priority and might actually move very quickly because it includes telebehavioral health provisions and provisions for practicing across state lines. Okay, so this is just a quick reminder that American Counseling Association's membership is an asset for any counseling advocate. If you're interested in learning more about all the different opportunities provided by membership, you can go to counseling.org/membership. So just a reminder, because I went so very fast tonight. For more information, you can visit our webpage, counseling.org, Government Affairs, Public Policy. And you can visit our Action Center for more on our action alerts and current legislative priorities. And this is my contact information. So if you have any questions about state agendas, if you need advice on policy, you can contact me here. If you have something more general, you can just contact our entire team at advocacy@counseling.org. I went very fast, so I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Dominique. Yes, questions at this time would be wonderful. If you want to put them in the chat, then one of our team members can read those out loud. Otherwise, feel free to unmute yourself and ask what question is on your mind here. And Dominique, maybe we can start with a question that our communications officer, Franny, had sent through before she unfortunately had to step away. How can CSJ collaborate with your office to advocate for counselors and mobilize members?
Yeah, that is a great question. I'd love to see, as I was saying, when I first began at ACA, which is, within the last year, I kind of hit the ground running. Last session was so entirely different. I was really flying by the seat of my pants, and we were working on we're working on conversion therapy bans and opposing the kind of rising tide of anti-LGBTQ legislation that was hitting legislatures last session. That was really an all hands on deck moment. So what I always find useful is I wish I had the bandwidth to sort of constantly be communicating. But if CSJ were able to kind of check in from time to time I could clue them in on whatever might be the emergency that's happening right now. But also, our website's a great resource. I will say that even our website is a little bit slower than what's happening on the ground. So that kind of regular communication, I'm happy to hop in sometimes if you have pre-scheduled meetings to just give us that time to sort of communicate and say, oh yeah, this is what's been going on, and you can tell me what's been going on your end. Does that make sense? Great.
Dominique, I had a question. So you talked about identifying issues like early on in the presentation. And clearly that comes from the grassroots piece of what is actually going on, what are the needs and the dreams in your community. But sometimes there's like 20 things going on. So, and we have very limited time. We don't, as counselors, it's frustrating because we have to balance, we don't get paid to do the advocacy work.
Right.
There. So how do we choose what issue first?
Everyone has a different way of doing it. Another member of our team might say something differently. From my perspective, I run into this all the time, even though this is what I'm paid to do. Sometimes we have years like 2020 where it's just never ending, like kind of just crisis after crisis. And you still need to do your regular agenda or regular work, whatever that may be. And sometimes for me, it helps, like when I was looking at COVID-19 and kind of the swelling of the Black Lives Matter movement and the need to really address this issue, we really did want to talk about how do you talk about policing in your community. But as counselors, I also knew that our leverage was better used in the public health sphere as much as possible. So while we threw out some legislation, you can go support this, what was most important and foundational was that we begin at, unfortunately, the beginning, which is declaring racism a public health crisis. So that might not feel like revolutionary change. It's going to take a few years for that to really be felt in the community. But without that basis in the public health sphere, then we don't have enough broad support in sort of state level agencies to create systemic change. But if we declare something a public health crisis, then now we have a mandate to agencies across the board to begin addressing this issue. And we can really just work out what that means, which is really, to me, powerful. So sometimes it's asking, like, what piece of legislation can we work on that has the broadest effect? Does that make sense?
I have a question. It's okay if okay, just making sure. I was going to put it in the chat and I thought it'd be just as easy to ask. Dominique, if we are working, I'm a student at William and Mary, and if we are working with a chapter of CSJ, we're in the middle of forming one right now. Is this something where the chapter leadership could communicate with you to try and make sure that we're targeting the issues that are relevant for our state, or is there somewhere else we should be reaching for? Or that's sort of what I'm thinking. Do we have a direct link to you? Can we have a direct link to you to talk about those things and make sure we're pursuing the right agenda, not the right agenda, but the highest priority?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are so many different levels because CSJ is a division. It's a little bit different. ACA is a little wonky. So there are so many different channels you could go through, but yes, you can always contact me directly. And if I'm not able to sit down and maybe have like a consultation, I will always update you on our most recent issues, give you whatever material I'm giving every state branch that maybe you don't have access to for whatever reason, or just haven't gotten yet, or maybe they haven't prioritized. And then you can have that information.
Perfect, because I'm a member of both ACA and CSJ, so I'd like to think I'm getting everything, but if I'm not, it would be nice to sort of be able to say, okay, making sure that we have the most updated, the whatever, and just know that we have a way to get in touch with you or someone in the organization to make sure that we're supporting the organization's efforts.
Yeah, and CSJ is different than a lot of other maybe divisions, right? Like, okay, maybe I'm a little biased because I love social justice, but it's just a little bit more urgent, right? So last session, I really wanted to continue, and I'll probably still continue focusing on LGBTQ issues, but not with the ferocity maybe I was doing last session, maybe more orienting towards, again, COVID-19 and what's happening here. So there's a level of urgency maybe in social justice issues that isn't there for other divisions. That's really like, okay, yeah, we have to put out this fire before we can do this. And I would love to say that we're communicating perfectly, instantly to all our members, but we're just not probably doing that. So that direct communication will be helpful.
Dominique, I have a question here from Shirley. Could you speak a little bit more on conversion therapy? Have all states banned it?
No. Recalling back from last session, a few months ago, we were up to about 31 states banning it, with Virginia last session, due to their turnover at the legislature, which is very good. They banned it. So I think that was the 31st state. So we're still looking at a good amount of work. And of course, we don't have a national ban.
Is there anything you recommend for counselors who want to get involved with addressing conversion therapy?
Yeah, you can contact me. I'm happy to provide you material. You can also, of course, make it known that ACA, both national, state, like everything that is ACA, supports conversion therapy bans when you're meeting with your members. And then, of course, we have a close partnership with HRC. So HRC works very intimately with on the conversion ban issue. So if you're looking for contacts maybe in your state or locality that might be useful for that, I can reach out to HRC's policy team for you and find that.
I have another question. I just want to make sure I didn't jump. So earlier we talked about you need the grassroots level, and then you need the macro to be able to make sustainable change, and to be in line with the actual needs of the community. And then there's the meso level. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to coalition building and how that happens and why that's beneficial and how it impacts the macro level work as well.
And it's beneficial on so many different levels, right? Like we know more people is better. We know having access to the resources that more people, a diverse coalition brings, better. But there's also a difference between a culture of change and just working on isolated campaigns. So like, for example, when we were looking at the big groundswell that happened over the past year on Black Lives Matter, that didn't come from, this one sudden campaign, this one incidence of violence. That came from a sustained movement over a long period of time. So coalition building allows us to utilize our networks and to increase our impact, but at the same time, it also cultivates a culture that is ready to respond to any sort of very urgent, important moment. Does that make sense? And when you're looking at coalitions, so they can be all different kinds of levels. Like you want to look at, obviously, coalitions of like-minded folks in your community, but also in your profession and then across professions. So what are unlikely advocates that maybe you hadn't thought of before? And so there are different ways you can do, coalition building. And it just depends on how much time you have and like how and what your issue is. But it is incredibly important.
Dominique, I have another question here in the chat. This is from Kani and Sola. Wondering if you know anything about happening about the school to prison pipeline, any ways that counselors can get involved, specifically school counselors?
That's a great question. So we actually do have this pressing desire on our team to do more in the realm of school counseling. It is very much kind of one of those things that's both grassroots and not at the same time, because you have this connection to this larger counseling community, but you are on the ground in the schools working in these systems. So we don't have anything right now at the state level that's like a tangible policy that we're working on, but it is an issue we're aware of. And you know, it's definitely an issue that I see. I come from the foster care community, which is also a prison, you know, a school, like a foster care to prison pipeline. So these issues are very, very important, but I haven't written them into like a tangible policy into our agenda. So if you're interested in doing that, I would love to sit down and have that conversation. You can contact me.
I'm curious to know, what are some of the challenges that you face in your role, and what are some of the fantastic things that you experience? It's just the same.
Okay, great question. The challenge is there's never enough time, never, you know, like the need is always so great. And it's kind of figuring out how to prioritize, and also recognize that change is like kind of procedural. Like it's not like this revolutionary thing. It's like it's a strategic kind of process. And the benefit of that, or I guess like the positive, like the flip side, is that if you're somebody who's dedicated to it, you know, as a profession, as a career, as a lifelong advocate, it kind of becomes just like a daily part of your life that you integrate this into your entire life, which is great, like social justice work. And then you'll end up seeing over time like really big systemic changes, but sometimes the work can seem very process oriented versus, you know, like you're not seeing like big dramatic solutions. Maybe you're seeing, first we declared a public health crisis and then we do XYZ. So that can be the difficult part, is just that you can burn out really easily. You can run out of time, and you can kind of be disenchanted with it if you're looking for immediate change. But the good things I've seen, and there's so many, I mean, I love this work. So when I was working for the Maryland legislature, we were working on extending the statute of limitations for child sex abuse survivors. That's civil action, and for civil action. It's such like a little thing. It's a little thing. It's extending the amount of years that a child sex abuse survivor can press charges against their perpetrator. And Maryland, being a historic Catholic state, actually the birthplace of American Catholicism, and everything that was going on in the Catholic Church at the time in the crisis, they were just vehemently opposed. So this bill came before the legislature for 13 years. I wasn't there for the whole time. I was just there for the last couple of years of it. And we had folks show up to testify by the like hundreds. And they would just like pack the room with these heart-wrenching stories. We had people that, you know, were young, but then we had senior citizens that had spent their entire lives working on this issue, making these kind of small changes that to a lot of folks really, like from the outside, you're like, oh, okay, you have a few more years to press charges. Like maybe that's not that big of a deal, but it really, it's this like fight for power and like this fight for survivors to have the dignity of hearing their voice, that their voice matters, that what happened to them matters, and that they have a way to sort of advocate for themselves. finally, this bill started picking up momentum when I actually tag teamed with a delegate in the Maryland Senate and the Maryland House who also grew up in foster care. He was a former Marine and had been abused his entire childhood by his foster father, who was like a Boy Scout leader and like all of this, like a renowned, like a respected figure. And he gave these compelling narrative of his life that like people, like hardened lawyers were like crying. It was like a big thing. You know, we actually had to do this for a couple of years. What they were doing with the bill was they weren't even allowing a vote on it, because if folks had voted on it, it would have passed. They were just putting the bill in the jar. They were like putting it away and not even allowing a vote. Well, finally, I guess like public momentum built to such the point that the Catholic Church felt like they had to come to the table and compromise, finally. So we were able to pass it, and it was like this huge, like I will remember this for the rest of my life. It will be like a story I tell forever, in which these people who have spent their whole lives like finally got their moment of justice. And I think when you can be there for that, like that to me is the point of the work. It's a very long answer to your question.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Dominique, thank you so much for your time here. We truly appreciate it. This has just been so valuable. So a quick note for anybody interested in continuing education credit, I am going to go ahead and send the link right in the chat there. So if you go ahead and complete that form, we'll be able to send you your certificate. So once you have your link, we appreciate you joining. If you want to go ahead and take the link and exit the room, a group of us are going to stay on, and that gives some time in case anybody has a last burning question they would like to ask Dominique as well.
Thank you guys so
Thank you,
much
everyone.
for listening.
Thank you.
Mm,